All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to Vermont Applies Present Scholarships 101. Today, we'll be talking about what scholarships are and how to find them and apply for them from VSAC to nationally. This presentation is being offered as part of VSAC's Vermont Applies initiative. And before we get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping pieces I just want to review. All participants are muted. We do encourage you to submit any questions that you have throughout the presentation right in the chat. I will be monitoring those and will surface them up to our presenter. This presentation is going to be recorded and will be shared with all of you and posted online for later viewing. Now, with us for today's presentation is VSAC Outreach Counselor Carrie Harlow. Carrie has been a member of the VSAC Talent Search staff since 2002 and has been helping families apply for financial aid for more than 20 years. As the first in her family to attend a four-year college, Carrie has made it her mission to help people understand and feel more empowered in the financial aid process. She is the mother of two young men, one of whom is in his junior year of college. And if I may, Carrie was my VSAC Outreach Counselor, so I'm especially delighted that she's here with us to share her scholarship knowledge with all of you. So I'll turn it over to Carrie for the presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. And I'm really happy to see you all here today virtually. I know it's a beautiful day outside and you're choosing to probably be indoors to take advantage of this scholarship presentation opportunity. So thanks for being with us. Before we get started, I'd love to do a quick poll to see who's here with us today. So Chris, if you could bring that up for us. This is a multiple choice question, so you could answer more than one thing if more than one applies to you. And we'll just wait a few more seconds for people to get their votes in. Okay, perfect. So here's who we have with us. Um, we have, sounds like some high school students, some parents of high school students, and the parent of a college student. So we're really happy to see you, and we'll be certain to talk about a number of things that will be interesting for you today in the presentation. Oop, went too far. All right. Um, so let's talk about scholarships first so that we're all on the same page. Scholarships are free money to help pay for college. Money can come from various sources, and named scholarships are often out there to honor someone or an organization or a garden club or veterans groups. There are a number of different types of scholarships out there. There are some that are based on financial need, which means that they are based on the family's ability to pay. There are merit-based scholarships, which are based on a student's grades, talent, community service, need, and merit combined. Um, and there are also some contests. You may have seen some of those. Niche runs a no essay contest. College Board has their opportunity scholarships, and the duct tape stuck at prom contest are more contests. And so they're not necessarily based on a student's abilities or their family's financial need. These scholarships are more based on whether or not a student ends up getting chosen. Scholarships can help fill the gap between the family's EFC and what the college offers for financial aid. For families with more resources, merit scholarships might sometimes help with some of the family contribution, especially in the case where a family has a higher family contribution and they're looking at a lower cost college. A scholarship could actually cut in and take care of some of the family contribution. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but for now, it will be important to understand, how colleges might treat outside scholarships in their financial aid packages so that you can know exactly what role the scholarships will play in your particular circumstance. Now, it's important to remember that scholarships often take work on the part of the student applicant. And it's important as you undertake this process that you understand that some of you will need to work for some of these scholarships. And let's talk about the 3 keys to success. In most situations related to the financial aid process and the whole college application process, the responsibility for communication is shared. It involves both the organization involved, maybe the college or VSAC, and the student applicant. Often colleges and financial aid offices and agencies, like the Vermont Grant Program, will communicate back and forth with the student, letting the student know what's missing, reminding them about deadlines. But this isn't the case with scholarships. Here, the onus falls solely on the student applicant. While scholarship agencies might answer questions like, how may I access the application, or have you received my scholarship application or recommendations, a scholarship agency will not get in touch with you to say that information's missing or incomplete, or to remind you about upcoming deadlines. Scholarship agencies will also not reach out to a student to say, hey, we think you're a good match for this, you should apply. So communicating well and understanding the scholarship process is part of showing that you're the best candidate for that scholarship. Additionally, there are eligibility requirements that students need to check out. Oftentimes for scholarships, there are multiple eligibility requirements that students have to meet. And unless a scholarship says specifically things like preference given to, most scholarships, the requirements will be the requirements, and you need to meet all of them in order to qualify. As I mentioned, those scholarships are unique or different for each scholarship, and the requirements are often determined by the creators or the donors of the scholarship. Oftentimes, for a named scholarship, it might have to do with something like how that person that the scholarship is named after was. As for the communication piece, finding scholarships for which you meet the eligibility requirements is also part of showing that you're the best candidate for the scholarship. And finally, scholarships are competitive. So students have to meet the eligibility requirements and then they apply and compete with other applicants, all of whom meet those eligibility requirements. So students have to prove they're the best applicant. Competition means submitting your best work, as well as giving your recommenders, if needed, sufficient time to write a strong letter on your behalf. And while this is a process where recycling works, you may be able to edit essays in order to give information, providing you're the best applicant for a scholarship. And you might be able to ask a recommender who also wrote a college admission recommendation for you. You want to make certain that you adjust that essay as well as make certain the recommendation is adjusted to say that it is for scholarship consideration rather than college admission. So the timeline typically for a search, for juniors, we really want to think about beginning second semester. If the student's interested in national scholarships, the search should really begin then. You can begin with some free national searches, which we'll talk about in a bit, using some of our recommended sites. In the senior year, students should be checking the counseling office at their high school, school announcements, school websites or bulletin boards, local newspapers, town offices for scholarship information and applications. The applications can begin as early as September for some seniors. And in a way, you have to beware of application fatigue because once students have completed college applications, they kind of think they're finished with everything related to applying, and scholarships might require another push. For adults who are returning to school or attending, they might find that there will be scholarships that have early deadlines that they missed. And maybe those deadlines that had passed also could be applicable for future years. So it's good to kind of keep your eyes open for those. As far as VSAC timelines, we have a VSAC scholarships book that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, but we are right in the midst of the application timeline for VSAC assisted scholarships, and we'll be talking about that more in the future. So the largest sources of scholarships are oftentimes the colleges or universities to which the students have been admitted. And you might want to ask about whether or not scholarships are available through the financial aid office, or are they possibly part of the admissions process? And are you automatically reviewed as part of your admissions application? When you get a scholarship, you want to find out if those scholarships are renewable or are they just for 1 year? And are there deadlines for considerations for scholarships? I want to give an example. Some colleges are rolling admissions, but you have to have applied by a certain date for admission and financial aid in order to qualify for scholarships at those particular institutions. So even though it's rolling admissions and it looks like they have a later deadline, you may want to be applying earlier in order to meet deadlines for scholarships. You should also check scholarships and whether there are those available from sources other than the college's admissions or financial aid office, perhaps in your degree program, like engineering, English, education, science. Does the college have any scholarships available to upperclassmen only? How may students be considered for those in the future? And so this is part of that research that takes place. You can ask if you need to fill out a separate application for scholarships, or are you automatically considered with the admissions application? Are the scholarships renewable? Do I need to reapply? And very important is to find out what the criteria will be to keep that particular scholarship if it's renewable. The other question you should ask your college or university that you're accepted to is, how will other scholarships I receive from outside sources affect financial aid at that particular college or university? And let me just mention that for some colleges, they have not met the family's financial need. And so the family has an EFC and the college offers their financial aid, but there's a gap between the EFC and financial aid offered. In many cases, students can use scholarships to fill that gap. And but other colleges might say, well, we've done our best, and if you bring in outside scholarships, we'll reduce your work study or your loans. And in that case, that would be wonderful, because instead of borrowing money or having to work for it, you're using free money to do that. Additionally, there are a few colleges out there, probably less than 60 nationwide, that will meet a student's full financial need. And for those particular colleges, if a student brings in an outside scholarship, they may reduce their free money dollar for dollar. And in that case, the student should probably know that if they're applying for outside scholarships and they end up choosing that particular college or university, then they will not see a net difference based on their work. So at VSAC, we like to use the saying, start global, but finish local. So when you start looking for national scholarships, um, a lot of times they have some earlier deadlines, and you can head out to the internet. Yes, there are books available that have scholarships listed in them, but before you go and buy a book, please know that the minute a book is published, it's out of date. New scholarships can be added, or other scholarships could be stopping awarding students. And so the internet would probably be the most up-to-date source of information that you might have. Because everyone has access to the internet, the pool of applicants for any given national scholarship is likely to be larger. And therefore, your chances of receiving that scholarship might be lower. You think about a larger applicant pool with thousands of students means less odds of winning that particular scholarship. So when we're talking about different resources, FastWeb and collegeboard.org are both free national searches. And we also have some other recommended free sites on the VSAC website under the scholarships heading if you want to check those out. Militaryscholar.org, I wanted to use as an example. That's a scholarship resource for learners with a military connection. And raise.me has information for juniors through seniors about colleges that offer scholarships for things that the student is already doing. So you can see which colleges might offer scholarships based on your GPA, standardized test scores, activities, and leadership experience. But for a successful scholarship search, you should also be looking around your own community. Remember, when you're applying for scholarships locally, you're competing against fewer students. Therefore, your odds are better. I worked with a student a number of years ago who was applying for local scholarships, and he showed me one where it said the top 10 students who apply for this particular scholarship will be awarded. And it was interesting because he said to me, I know I'm not in the top 10. I'm probably in the top 20 of my graduating class. Well, it was funny because I said to him, you never know who else is applying, so you should apply. And guess what? He got the scholarship because you are only competing not only against the people locally, but only against the people who will actually end up applying and completing their applications. So some places to look is your high school. Many high schools have a web page or a bulletin board or a file where they list local scholarships that they hear about. Some high schools have an application and awarding process as part of an awards night before high school graduation. You definitely want to check that out with the school counseling office at your school. Town officials sometimes have access to information about scholarships. And I noticed once when I was in my town office, which, by the way, due to COVID is now closed, so I can't go visit there, but they had a bulletin board and there were different scholarship posters that were listed there. Employers sometimes offer scholarships, as well as local community groups like the Elks, Lions, Rotary, Places of Worship. And I want to mention Think Vermont. Now, that scholarship application is not posted yet, but it should be soon. That is for new college students who are choosing to attend college in Vermont for the 2021-2022 school year. My understanding is that as soon as that link is live with an application, that information will be available on the Vermont Applies website. Is that right, Chris? Great.
Yes, that's right.
Perfect. Another way to find local resources, I know this sounds kind of old fashioned, but word of mouth. Parents and grandparents and friends who have students who have recently graduated, they may have information about local scholarships that you don't know about. I remember someone told my husband about a scholarship when our son was a senior in high school that was available for wrestlers, and to make certain that my son, who was a wrestler, applied for that scholarship. We would not have been looking for it had we not heard about it from someone else. By looking locally, you're focusing again on those smaller applicant pools with fewer students to compete against, and that means your odds of winning a scholarship could be better. You know, think about competing against 25 to 50 students as opposed to 10,000. So let's talk about the 4 simple steps as you embark on a scholarship search application process. You want to identify all the scholarships for which you're eligible to apply. And this is a search, so you're going to be looking. You want to read and follow the instructions. For instance, if a scholarship application says you need to keep your essay to 1 page, that is very important. If they say you have to use blue ink, please don't use pencil. You need to submit on or before the deadline. And this is really important. Part of the competition of a scholarship is meeting the deadline. And you want to make sure that you know what the deadline is. For instance, is it a postmark deadline? Does it have to be processed through the post office by a certain date? Is it a receipt deadline? It has to be there by a certain date. Or is it a submission deadline where online you have to do something before a certain time? And finally, you want to confirm receipt and completeness of documents. And that's the last one on your checklist, but it's also important, so don't forget it. In an ideal situation, you would beat the deadline by a week or so. Give it a day or two and then call to confirm that everything's in, ensuring that if something's missing, you still have time to get it in. If you submit at the last minute on the deadline date, and then you call to confirm the day after the deadline, it's too late to be able to do anything about something that wasn't received. So each scholarship may have unique requirements. We mentioned that before. Some are very simple. Others may have lots of supplemental documents needed. I just want to make a plug here about community service as well as we look at the various things that are required for different scholarships. More and more scholarships, it seems, have a community service or community involvement component. It's important to think about the ways you can or have volunteered in your community and school, and think about how you'll document those good deeds. Please keep in mind that recommendations, as I mentioned before, should be updated to say for scholarship consideration, because when you are competing against other students, it's those little things that kind of rise you to the top of the applicant pool. It's really important to keep track of what's due where and when things get sent, and who you've asked to submit information. So all of this is very important. And like I said, some things will require very few things as part of your application, and some scholarships will require more information. So I'd like to talk for a minute about the VSAC assisted scholarships, the scholarships that VSAC administers. If you are a senior or the parent of a senior, we are in the process right now. And the scholarships that VSAC assists with are in our VSAC scholarships booklet. That booklet is available in many school counseling offices throughout the state of Vermont. It's also available online if you wanted to download it from vsac.org/scholarships. And also, it can be mailed to you. If you make a request to VSAC, we can mail you out the scholarship booklet as well. We want to have you aware of our deadline of February 11th, 2021. I have seen different sources out there that say, hey, the deadline to apply for VSAC scholarships is February 11th, 2021. That's a little bit of a misconception. The deadline to receive all the required documents is actually February 11th. So it's not only the application, but also any recommendations or essays or transcripts have to be in by that date. In the back of the book, what you will find is we have some other scholarships. So in addition to the VSAC assisted scholarships, I think from page 37 on in the scholarship booklet, we have these other scholarships. We are not assisting with those scholarships, but we are publicizing them for different organizations. So it's important to check those out too. Those will have separate applications and separate deadlines. So it's really important to check those out, because there may be some in there that the student could also apply for. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that in the scholarships booklet, in addition to scholarships for traditional colleges and universities, we also have a number of scholarships available for Vermont students who are doing short-term training programs. And be sure to look out for those. In addition, if you do need funding for short-term training, there are some new scholarships that are available that are not in the VSAC scholarship book, but I'd encourage you to contact our Educational Opportunity Center program at VSAC to connect with one of our EOC counselors. So let's apply those 4 steps to VSAC assisted scholarships. You need to search for scholarships confirming the student's eligibility requirements. So I think there's more than 130 scholarships in the VSAC scholarship book, but not every student will be applying for every scholarship because there are very specific eligibility requirements. Students will then complete the Unified Scholarship Application, also called the USA. And on that application, students have to designate the scholarships for which they want to be considered. So that's why you need to go through the book and determine which scholarships first. Students will then submit required documents, again, before that February 11th deadline. And oftentimes students need to submit usually an essay, at least one recommendation, and a transcript from their school. And then finally, students should confirm receipt of documents. There's also, I should mention, a recording of VSAC Shows You How of a Facebook Live event we did on applying for Vermont grants and VSAC scholarships on our VSAC videos page. So you can check that out if you're needing some more assistance with filling out the scholarship application and how to upload documents. And so page 4 of the scholarship booklet actually has information on how to read a scholarship description. You want to get familiar with this before reading the different eligibility criteria and scholarship eligibility requirements. Your first sweep through the booklet should be to focus on the type of student eligible. So you'll be looking for high school students, any student, or college students and any student. Adult students are generally students who are independent for financial aid purposes. So sometimes students mistakenly think they're an adult student if they're over 18. That is not the case. Adult students are independent for financial aid purposes. Um, Another thing I want to mention is in many of the scholarship descriptions, it says attend an accredited school approved for federal Title IV funding. And so many students I work with are like, what does that mean? What it means is attend a college or university or trade school that's eligible to receive federal financial aid funds, like federal student loans or Pell Grants. Now, students will fill out the Unified Scholarship application online. And a student will need a MyVSAC account in order to do this. Now, if you created a MyVSAC account to apply for a Vermont grant, you can use that same MyVSAC account. As a matter of fact, you need to use that same MyVSAC account to apply for scholarships. If you're a student and you're not certain if you have a MyVSAC account, maybe check with your parent because it's possible that they filed your financial aid applications for you and didn't tell you about it. But once you're logged into My VSAC, you actually get this dashboard that you'll see. And to apply for scholarships, you will choose Work with VSAC Assisted Scholarships. You want to make certain to choose the correct year. For instance, for this year coming up, you want the 2021-2022 Unified Scholarship application. Once you've submitted the Unified Scholarship application, you actually get another dashboard of information. And one of the things you will get is you can look at the required documents page. And on the required documents page, you can see the required documents for all of the scholarships that you applied for. In addition, there's also a link there to upload scholarship documents. So you can upload your essay, or if you have a copy of your recommendations, you can upload those. Your high school, if you're a high school student, has the ability to upload transcripts to our system. Or we can use old-fashioned mail as well. You can mail in an essay, you can have recommendations mailed into VSAC, and you can have transcripts mailed into VSAC. Oftentimes, college students will need to have their college or university send VSAC by mail a copy of their college transcript. And on the required documents screen, you can see their completion status. So the document status shows up as if it's complete or not received yet, and what is considered the postmark date. So if there was a postmark on a piece of mail, that shows up there. If it was submitted online, that shows up as the postmark date as well. So let's talk for a minute specifically about these required documents for VSAC scholarships. Recommendation letters are talked about more fully on page 2 of the scholarships booklet. Recommendations have to be either on letterhead or signed or both, but they need at least one of those things. And there's also a format to be followed for labeling. At VSAC, we need to know who the letter's for, the applicant's date of birth, and which letter it is. The label should be at the top of the letter where it can be easily seen. We're going to get a lot of pieces of mail at VSAC, and it would be much easier for us to see that this is Johnny Smith's recommendation, letter number 1, non-relative, and Johnny Smith's date of birth in case we have more than one Johnny Smith. Information about the essay to be written is found on page 3 of the VSAC scholarships booklet. Now, this is again where when you're applying for scholarships through VSAC and you're looking at the VSAC assisted scholarships and the eligibility requirements, your essay will need to reflect the things that the scholarship are asking for. So the eligibility requirements need to be addressed in your essay. So for instance, focus on commitment goals, focus on financial need, focus on community service, and focus on uniqueness. If you're applying for a scholarship that is for students who are first generation college bound, you should definitely talk about that in your essay. If you're applying for a scholarship where it talks about having shown resilience in the face of a hardship or a difficulty in your life, you'll need to talk about that in the uniqueness section. One essay can be used for most of the VSAC assisted scholarships. You're just going to make sure that you put the different things in there to address the different scholarships that you're applying for. Sometimes people will ask me, should I just write an essay, a flowing essay, or would you rather I chunk this up, if you will, based on the different essay content criteria. So the commitment goals, financial need, community service, and uniqueness. And what I can tell you is that scholarship committees at VSAC do like to see the separated information well laid out. But if you're writing a flowing essay, we will not discriminate against you based on that. We'll just read the essay. It's totally fine. So let's talk about next steps. And while I don't have the knowledge or to be able to comment on every scholarship program selection process, maybe I can give you some insight into how VSAC's process works. You know, VSAC's scholarship selection criteria are typically listed in the scholarships book in order of importance under the heading selection. So each criteria reduces the applicant pool further. For example, um, let's use a starting number of 50. The applicant pool starts with everyone who listed that scholarship ID on their unified scholarship application. So let's say 50 people applied for this one scholarship. Do you know that about half of those candidates are either ineligible for the scholarship or they don't complete all the required paperwork? Half. So that takes that number from 50 down to 25. And then the published selection criteria for the scholarship lists them in order of importance. So let's say the criteria are listed this way: academic achievement, financial need, essays, and recommendation letter. So what that means, of the remaining 25, the selection committee will attempt first to kind of look at the academic achievement of that group. From what's left, they will then look at the students and their financial need. And then essays, further reducing the field, and then the recommendation letters. Um, and for notification, VSAC will notify all applicants whether or not they get a scholarship. Our scholarship recipients will receive a letter, but students who are not selected to receive a scholarship will have a notification show up in their My VSAC account. There is actually a scholarships page where you can see if the scholarship is still pending, we're waiting for a notification, or if it's been awarded, or if it's been declined. So they're able to see that. But for other scholarships, you may not hear from a scholarship committee um, unless you receive the scholarship. So they will only notify the scholarship winners. And in that case, people who haven't heard may not have received the scholarship. So let's talk a little bit about scams. There are scams out there that want to prey on your desire to reduce your college costs through scholarships. And hearing phrases like, you can't get this information anywhere else, we'll do all the work, or there's a fee to apply for this scholarship, you're a finalist in a contest you never entered, or these scholarships are guaranteed or your money back, they should indicate to you that something's up. You know from what we've talked about today that scholarships are competitive and you need to prove that you're the best applicant. So if these claims are sounding too good to be true, they probably are. And I'll give you an example. My son, when he was a senior, my older son, when he was a senior, received a mailing from an organization that said they would do all the work. They would find the scholarships, they would help him apply, and he was guaranteed to get at least the money we spent on the service in scholarship money. So doing the work that I do, I decided to call and get a little bit more information. And when I was talking to them, I asked the question, I said, well, how can you guarantee this? Scholarships are competitive. And they said, well, all you have to do is show us your denial letters for scholarships. And if it equals the amount that you paid us, we'll refund you whatever you didn't get. And I thought for a minute and I said, well, that's really interesting. But I thought that a lot of scholarship agencies don't notify the people who don't get the scholarships. And you know what was the funniest thing? I got disconnected. So I think it's really important, as I tell you that story, to really be careful. This process all involves things that are free searches. It requires work on your part. And sometimes parents help students out a little bit, but these applications should definitely be the student's own. And with work, a student can do this completely free. So let's remember, in summary, Scholarships are competition based, so you need to show that you are the best applicant. You know, people ask me things like, does spelling count? Um, does neatness count? And of course that counts. You want to think about how your essay is being read. And so it's really important, again, that you give time to do multiple drafts of that essay and have someone look at it. You want to have time for recommenders to write a great recommendation. So those students who say to me, I do my best work at the last minute, I've served on scholarship committees, and what I can tell you is I don't think so. It's really important to give yourself time to do a good job. For scholarship searches, you should start global, but definitely focus local. And be aware of the effects of scholarships on other financial aid at your colleges or universities. Remember that you're going to be applying for some scholarships before you even know which colleges you've been admitted to. So just keep aware of that as you're applying, and also be aware of scholarship scams. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about some of our resources. On the VSAC website, if you go to vsac.org/scholarships, a lot of the information that we've covered here is actually on those pages. And also on the Vermont Applies page are more resources available. In addition, there's a handout that you can find. There's a review sheet that will have a link in the PowerPoint that's going to be shared with you after this workshop. And also, I mentioned that VSAC shows you how recording of how to apply for grants and scholarships. And so you can check that out as well as a possible resource. I realize I've covered a lot of information, and I'm wondering if people have any questions.
Nothing is coming through the chat, but I invite anybody with questions to please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask Carrie.
It was all very clear. Thank you for this information.
I have a question about financial need. So obviously there's great need and there's some need, and every family is different. And looking through the book, almost every single scholarship has an eligibility of demonstrate financial need. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, what does that mean? What would preclude you if you are filling in the FAFSA?
Sure. And just so you know, VSAC gets FAFSA information for every Vermonter who files a FAFSA. And so when we talk about financial need, what we're really looking at is that EFC, that expected family contribution that comes from the FAFSA. Now, that being said, we know that the FAFSA is not always a great indicator of what a family really has to pay for college education. And so some families are telling us, well, I had to use 2019 income information on my FAFSA, and 2020 has been nothing like 2019. And so in that case, that's really where talking about your financial need comes into play in the scholarship essay. But one of the things that VSAC will be looking at is that EFC. Um, and EFC is relative, right? The financial need is relative because you don't know who else is applying for this scholarship. So just like that student I was talking about who said, I'm not in the top 10 of my class, so I probably shouldn't apply for this scholarship. Sometimes families say, I don't know if I show enough financial need. And that's totally understandable because everybody's need is different. But if financial need is one of the things that's a little bit lower on the list and you have a higher EFC, it might be worth it to apply anyway because you don't know who else is applying and you don't know how that's going to sugar out in the selection process.
Can you explain what the FAFSA is?
Sure. The FAFSA is short for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And the FAFSA is the primary financial aid application that many students should be filling out before they head off to college. The FAFSA can be used not only to receive need or merit-based aid at some colleges, but it can also help a student get a low interest federal student loan. And so we recommend that students file a FAFSA as a senior in high school, at least to start, to see about aid eligibility and if they need a federal student loan.
Carrie, can you talk a little bit about where you can take VSAC scholarships? Do you have to attend a Vermont institution?
Oh, Chris, that's a great question. So many VSAC scholarships allow students to take their scholarship outside of Vermont. There are a few in there, but they will say in their eligibility requirements, attend an accredited post-secondary school approved for federal Title IV funding in Vermont. And so in those scholarships, they do have to be attending a Vermont college, but many of our scholarships can be taken out of state.
Thank you.
Oh, and I should mention that some of our scholarships can also be taken to Canada, to Canadian schools that are eligible for federal student loans.
We had a question come through the chat in regards to maybe how the pandemic might be impacting the community service portion of some of the scholarships in there. Do you have any insight you can share with us about that?
I sure can. I think you're right, the community service has really been impacted by, by COVID-19, and students not being able to, for instance, work at a food shelf, or maybe be able to do tutoring or things like that. So in any case where you can pivot to an online opportunity, we're hoping that students can do that. We still had, for instance, one of the community service things, we still had Green Up Day this year. It just looked a little bit different. So I'm hoping that students are still considering opportunities that they can volunteer at, where maybe they can do that virtually. And I've seen some students, for instance, mentoring virtually, tutoring virtually. They sometimes have been doing things related to sports or National Honor Society. So any opportunity where they've been able to find something and be able to talk about that. I do think that community service has been impacted. We'll have to see what that looks like in our next scholarship review.
Thank you. Any other questions? These are great questions. Let's test Carrie's knowledge. Okay. Looks like no more questions are coming through. Do you have any final words of wisdom for everybody, Carrie? Oh, Francine's got one. Go right ahead.
I do have a question, and this is for if there are any students on the call, or for parents who may be coaching or guiding students. What are your recommendations around asking for letters of recommendation from people? Because I know sometimes that can feel a little uncomfortable. So, what are some sort of best practices, perhaps?
So if you'd like, I can answer that, because my son actually went through the whole applying for scholarships process. And what I can tell you is that when he asked recommenders, it was very similar to asking recommenders for college admission. So he asked them if they would be willing to write a letter for scholarship applications. He tried to give them lots of time. He gave 6 weeks notice, which I think takes us pretty close to the beginning of January, in order to give the recommenders time. He showed them the page in the VSAC scholarships book for the format, and told one of the recommenders, his community service recommender, he told him a little bit about, you know, what scholarships he was applying for and why he needed him to talk about community service. And he did send a reminder, because he did see that one of the recommendations was not in a week before. And so he gave a reminder to one of his recommenders, which was really helpful for that person. And I will say, when he was done, he made certain to write a thank you note. And I think that if you can do something nice for that person, that is always very helpful. When people write letters of recommendation, they do give time and energy to this. And one of the letters was shared with us, and it was simply wonderful. And I believe my son made that person brownies to to make certain to say thank you. And that's not to say that everybody should do that, and that's everybody's circumstance. But if you can, a thank you note and doing something nice is always great.
Shifting gears a little bit, Carrie, how early can students apply for some of these scholarships? Can they apply as early as their junior, maybe sophomore year, or are they only for seniors?
So there are a few scholarships, especially national scholarships, that are open to juniors, but most of them happen during the senior year. And so you just want to watch carefully for some of those scholarships and see what the requirements are and the eligibility requirements. Um, what I recommend for juniors is really to be doing some research in the second semester of their junior year, even looking at the VSAC scholarships book. We might add some scholarships or take away some scholarships from year to year, but getting an idea of what's in there kind of helps them to think about, oh, maybe I should beef up my community service somehow. Maybe I should find some ways, maybe to get my GPA up just a little bit. So it's sometimes helpful to be doing the searching process early, but the VSAC scholarships application was available October 1st for our February 11th deadline. And other scholarships, if you go to their website, especially some of the national ones, they will say, look for our scholarship application during this date, or we'll have the scholarship application up, or our applications have closed for this coming school year. So you'll be able to see that on some of those websites.
Part of your answer actually just answered part of the next question, was is it a good idea to start the process in September, October? In the case of VSAC scholarships, it sounds like October is the earliest. But is it better to get everything in before the holidays in December, or is there any disadvantage to that, to acting that quickly? And the person who asked loved the brownie idea.
Oh, great. Um, I know I'm sorry, I shouldn't say who doesn't love brownies, because then all the brownie haters will come out of the woodwork, and we don't want that to happen. But what I can tell you is that there's no penalty for applying early. Definitely not. Just make sure to give yourself the proper time that you need to do a good job on that essay and getting those recommendations in. You know, I normally would be in a high school, and my job has me working with high school students when they were in person full time and having visitors in the school. And I can't tell you, with all my years of experience, how many times on the deadline date I would see students coming into the school counseling office and saying, hey, can you write me a recommendation for that VSAC scholarship? Please don't be that person. Please give yourself plenty of time. And I bet if you're here at this workshop, you're thinking about getting things done early, and that's great. Um, but you know, and please don't feel like, oh, I wasn't searching in September or October, and now I'm way behind the eight ball. I don't think that that's true at all. Just make certain to give yourself plenty of time. If you can apply earlier and send things in earlier, that's great.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
And I will say, just as one final thought, parents and students work together a lot in this whole college application and financial aid process. Even if you're someone who lets your child do all the work, I was a firm believer in letting my child lead the way. We did work out things where if he needed help with deadlines and remembering those, that was kind of my role in the process. And so when we talk about, you know, communication in this process, it's great for students and the people who support them to be having conversations about like what roles people play and how can you help. And I know that that's a great discussion to have as part of this process is, okay, do you need my help with making sure you meet these deadlines? Or do you need my help by maybe proofreading your first draft or something like that? But this is not a process where students have to work all alone. There's a lot of people that make this happen, and we do understand that.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom and knowledge about scholarships and everything that you've discussed today. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody for joining us for today's presentation.
Yes, thank you for attending.